Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the first of Indiana's BEAD Challenge Process webinars. We are excited to have you all here today, and we have lots of content to cover. We're going to continue admitting people to the Zoom waiting room or to the call, as people get into the waiting room, but we're going to go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to turn it over to Steve Cox briefly to do introductions, and then we'll get going.
Want to thank everybody for attending. Looks like we have a pretty decent sized crowd here today. I'm Steve Cox. I'm the Indiana Infrastructure and Broadband Administrator and oversee the Indiana Broadband Office. On the call, joining Megan Miner, who's one of our Broadband Office consultants, along with Madison Rotek, who's also on the call today. We also have Amanda O'Daniel, who is our broadband program director, and Leela Sibley, who's our communications manager for the broadband office, along with multiple other folks from the broadband office on the call. I also want to acknowledge our teammates from Ready.net, Richmond Hahn and Dustin Loop, who are both on the call with us today as well to help provide some technical assistance today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan to begin the challenge process webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And just to let you know, this meeting is recording, and we will be posting both the slides and the recording online after the webinar is complete. So you can go back to reference any of the information that we covered today. We will also be adding lots of resources to the IBO website to help you with the challenge process throughout the month of February as we get closer to it beginning. So stay tuned for all of that. I'm going to go ahead and shift to the next slide, which is going to cover our agenda for today. We're going to go through several different topics. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is, as you have questions, feel free to ask those in the chat. If it's an easy question that we can answer immediately via chat, some of the members from the IBO are going to hop right on that. Otherwise, I'm going to stop periodically throughout the presentation to check and see if there are questions, and Madison will read them to me and we'll get those answered as we can. So as something comes up, definitely feel free to drop that in the chat. We will also hopefully have some time at the end to go through questions. And just know this is the first of many engagements that were leading up to the challenge process. So if you think of more questions later, there will definitely be time to cover those. So this is where we're headed today. We're going to do an overview of the challenge process, talk about permissible challengers, the timeline, CostQuest licensing. Then we're going to jump into specifics about the challenge process, so how you'll register, the types of challenges you can submit, and then we'll walk through some screenshots of what that will actually look like on the Connecting Indiana portal. We'll also talk a little bit about the rebuttal phase and what's coming next. So just to give you an idea of where we're going. I also know, recognizing that this group is largely internet service providers, that some of this information you likely already know, but we just want to make sure everyone has the same understanding and that we're covering all of our bases. So definitely bear with me if it's a slide you've seen before or something that you're already familiar with. So kicking off with what is the challenge process. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with BEAD and the challenge process, but really I want us all to think about the challenge process as an opportunity for the IBO to gather the most accurate data possible before we start our sub-grantee selection process. So this is really our opportunity to get sufficient evidence, really understand what's going on in the state with the most accurate data we have, so that we make sure that we have a comprehensive list of eligible locations before we begin the sub-grantee selection process. I think I've said this many a time in all of our listening sessions and our tour across the state, but this is a really important opportunity that we only get once. And so we want to make sure that we have the best data possible as we use this huge amount of funds to really get it right. So what data is being challenged during the challenge process? So I want to talk a little bit about what the baseline is and what permissible challengers will actually be challenging. So NTIA requires that states begin with the FCC broadband map as their underlying data source. Indiana will be using the underlying data that came out most recently in November of 2023. So that is the most recent full iteration of that FCC broadband map. That's the most up-to-date data, essentially, that we can use in terms of providers submitting that to the FCC. So that's going to be kind of our baseline data. The next thing that we are currently doing, and we are almost finished with, is deduplicating those enforceable commitments. So these are any locations across the state that already have federal, state, or local dollars allocated to them for broadband service. So specifically, we are currently deduplicating next level connections rounds 1 through 3 from those eligible locations, as well as in the Indiana connectivity program. So you're going to see those locations be removed from what's eligible for BEAD, since we can't duplicate funding. And essentially just that is what's going to make up our base map for the BEAD challenge process. So starting with that FCC broadband map, removing those enforceable commitments, that's going to be our base map that we're starting with for the challenge process. So who actually will participate in the challenge process? There are 3 groups of permissible challengers. This call is obviously targeted towards the internet service providers in Indiana for their part in the challenge process, which is one of our 3 permissible challengers. We may also have some individuals on this call that are from the other 2, which are nonprofit organizations and units of local government, just depending on if they couldn't make our webinar later in the week. So we're happy to have you here if that's you as well. So these are the permissible challengers. These are the types of organizations that will actually be eligible to register for the challenge process and actually submit those challenges. This is not to say that there isn't a role for the public in this entire process. It is likely that the public, members of the public, will be working with these permissible challengers to gather data, let them know that there is a challenge for a certain address. There's likely to be collaboration there, but just think that really all of this needs to be funneled through one of those permissible challengers. I also want to state, since we largely have internet service providers on the call, that we do typically think about nonprofit organizations and units of local government, communicating with the public and gathering that data. But there's also a role for internet service providers there as well. If you're serving a community and you know that the data is incorrect, there's also a role for you to potentially engage and submit those challenges as well. So moving into the challenge process timeline, I know that you all have been receiving Leela's emails, and this is something that we talked about high level during kind of our fall listening session tour, but want you to see all of the kind of hard and fast dates as we have them now for our challenge process. So right now we are before the challenge process has started. I'm going to circle back to talking about CostQuest. But in the next couple of weeks, we are going to start our pre-registration process, which essentially means that we are going to get permissible challengers registered in the Connecting Indiana portal ahead of that challenge process actually starting. This is so we can really hit the ground running when the challenge phase starts. So be looking out for emails about when registration is open. We do not have a hard date for that yet, but expect that really in the next 2-ish weeks to start getting notification about that. We'll be pushing that out via all of our normal channels, the newsletter, email, social media, all of that. So moving into the actual challenge process timeline. So this all starts with the challenge phase, which will open on March 4th. The challenge phase is going to be 30 days, and that is really the time frame to be able to submit any challenges from those permissible challengers. So the challenge phase will last from March 4th to April 3rd, at which time we will no longer be able to accept any challenges. We will promptly move into the rebuttal phase, which will be April 4th to May 3rd. And what's going to happen for the rebuttal phase is that internet service providers are going to be notified as soon as they have a challenge against one of their locations, so they can start to gather rebuttal evidence and collect their challenges, and then their rebuttals, and then they will actually submit that evidence during the April 4th to May 3rd timeframe. So again, we'll get notification and can start gathering at that point in time, but we'll have those 30 days to actually submit on the portal. And then after the rebuttal phase wraps up, that's when we'll move into final determination. So that's going to be effectively the month of May. And that's where the Indiana Broadband Office is going to review all of those locations that have been both challenged and received rebuttal evidence and make a final determination about whether or not they will be eligible for BEAD funds and that subgrantee selection process. So these are the dates to keep in mind. I think it's going to go by really quickly once we get going. So want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about how that process is going to work and the timeline. So one thing I skipped at the very beginning on the far left of the screen is that CostQuest licensing. So I'm sure that you have already received some emails from us about CostQuest licensing. This is something that we are encouraging permissible challengers that think they may want a CostQuest license to do as soon as possible. So that's really where we are right now, is in this educational piece, making sure that everyone has the tools to succeed in the challenge process. So I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about CostQuest, and then I'm going to pause for questions. So CostQuest and CostQuest licenses. So to actually administer the BEAD program, Indiana was required to enter into a licensing agreement with CostQuest. And essentially, they are the owner of that location level data that's used by the FCC broadband map. This is a little bit of a complicated agreement, but because of the terms of it, the IBO can't actually make this data fully available to permissible challengers without them having their own CostQuest licenses. That being said, the NTIA has an agreement with CostQuest so that these licenses are free for permissible challengers, but you do have to go through a request process to acquire one of those. So that's really the hurdle here to getting one of those licenses. A CostQuest license is not necessarily for everyone. So I want to talk about some scenarios in which it's going to be the most helpful. First, someone who is expecting to submit a really large number of challenges should get a CostQuest license. That's going to be particularly helpful for someone who's thinking about large bulk challenges, large number of locations. It's going to help you collect the data for that. The second to think about is that CostQuest gives you access to that full data fabric that's underlying the FCC broadband map. This is and can be a difficult data set to work with. So also think about the fact that you will likely need technical resources that can look at that data set and know how to use it in order for a CostQuest license to be effective. So we would encourage you, certainly it's free, go and request a CostQuest license if you think that is something you might pursue at all. But these are really the people that we're targeting for getting those CostQuest licenses. There are multiple kind of tiers of CostQuest licenses. Internet service providers should request a Tier D license. We do have the link to request in this slide deck. It is also on the IBO website. We're encouraging people to request this as soon as possible because there is a review period to be able to actually get approval for that license and get access. And, really so many states across the nation are doing their challenge process at the exact same time and are requesting, permissible challengers are requesting these CostQuest licenses. So we want to make sure that, if that review process takes a little bit of time, if there's a little bit of a delay, that everyone has that resource available to them. So we would suggest requesting this as soon as possible. Okay, with that, I am going to pause before I jump into the next piece about the process. Are there any questions right now, Madison?
Yes, there was one that was put into the chat, but Megan, can you, before we continue, I do not have host permissions. Can you please admit people in the waiting room?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was just able to admit everyone that was waiting.
Great. Okay. So then moving on, we have one question, the first one from Internet Communications, Inc. Why are you using the November FCC data? The new FCC filing is due March 1st, and this data should be used once posted. Otherwise, you were already using data that is months old.
Yep. So this is a great question. So provider data may be due to the FCC on March 1st, but that is not immediately available to the states or the public. It actually takes several months for the FCC to process this data and put out a new underlying fabric data set for the map. So while internet service providers will be submitting that data to the FCC, that won't be something that we have access to use for the challenge process. But that's a really good question.
Great, thanks. And then we have another one, question 2. You mentioned leaving out next level and Indiana connectivity. What about ARPA money that is randomly being handed out?
So I am guessing that this person may be referring to money that is being handed out at the local level. We are not currently aware of any enforceable commitments in that realm that have not already been reported to the FCC map. However, if they exist, that is a challenge that you can do during the challenge process to say that an enforceable commitment does already exist if it's not something that we already have record of.
Great, and that's all the questions that we've had so far. Oh,
Awesome.
actually 2 more just came in as we were speaking. We already touched on this one, so you don't have to repeat yourself, but what version of the FCC fabric is this? And then an additional is, how will you handle next level round 4 awards?
Yep, that is another great question. So I may not get the dates exactly correct, but I do know that Next Level Connections round 4 selection will kind of be taking place in tandem with the challenge process. Unfortunately, that is just a matter of timing that we can't avoid. What we will do at the end of the challenge process is deduplicate again, specifically for that Next Level Connections round 4. So we will take any that are awarded during their process off of the BEAD map after that's decided. We just won't have that obviously in time for that March 4th date. That's a great question.
Okay, as of now, that's all we've got.
All right, thanks.
Sorry, one more just came in. Not a question, but Okra has posted that awards will happen around June 4th. So great context.
Okay, great. Thank you. Keep those questions coming in the chat. That's super helpful. I'm going to jump into the next section and then we'll cover questions again. So moving on from cost quests and to actually getting into challenge process details and how an organization would use the portal. So we have partnered with ready.net. We have a couple of members from the ready.net team on this call. So they'll also be able to help me if there are any questions that I can't answer about the portal or how things will work. But when we open that pre-registration window, permissible challengers will be able to register on that ready.net portal. It's where everything is going to happen. You're going to submit challenges there. The rebuttal phase is going to happen there. You can kind of track your challenges throughout. And this is also ultimately going to be the portal that we use for subgrantee selection as well. So kind of think one cohesive portal throughout the entire time. Again, we will keep you posted around our pre-registration date, and then that will, of course, be open throughout the entire challenge phase. And that all of this is going to be available at the existing connectingindiana.com. There will be some new links on that main page that you'll be able to see for the registration process when we get there. So how it will work is that a permissible challenger organization will only need to be registered once. And then once that organization is confirmed, that organization can add multiple users for the same organization. So what we are going to say here is within your own organization, choose a single person that is going to handle the kind of umbrella registration for your group. And then once that is approved, you can start adding, any number of individuals that need to be able to access the portal, submit challenges, handle rebuttals, anything along those lines. But please just register the organization itself once and then add those additional users. Specifically for internet service providers, it's going to be pretty straightforward to do that registration. You'll need to provide some information like the provider name, the FCC registration number, a physical address, and then any kind of evidence, if it makes sense around, proving that you are who you say you are from that organization, whether that's a screenshot or something else. That's pretty loose, but we just want to have enough information so that we really know that we can confirm the permissible challenger that is registering in the system. So that will be a pretty straightforward process. And then once you're registered, again, you can add multiple users that can access that same organization. So now I am going to move into a quick review of the challenge types that permissible challengers will be able to submit during the challenge phase. We are going to go through screenshots of the complete submission process for 2 of these challenge types. Some of the ones that we think are going to be most relevant for the internet service providers, but again, we're going to be putting out significantly more tools and tutorials online that are going to walk through, each of these challenge types. And as always, I'll say online with our volume 1 includes, a full list of all of the challenge types, the evidence needed, the rebuttal evidence. You can always reference our initial proposal volume 1 for that full information out there. So as you all are likely familiar, we will be having both availability and speed challenges. So availability being that the broadband service identified in the data is not actually offered at that location. That could include a pretty wide range of evidence to show why that challenge is happening. We also have those speed challenges, meaning that the actual speed of the service at the location falls below the unserved or underserved thresholds. This is the place where kind of the minimum level of evidence are those 3 speed tests taken on 3 different days, and then also submitting that proof of tier that the subscriber is paying for. So just want to throw that out there as we continue to talk about this. Some pretty specific evidence if you're using speed tests in a challenge type. Similarly, we also have latency and data cap challenges that are going to be really similar at the provider level. Along with that, we'll also have the technology and business service only. Again, you'll see with all of these, the example evidence type is really going to differ based on the type of challenge, and there could be a really wide range of evidence types. So just be thinking about this as you start to think about the types of challenges that you may want to submit and what evidence is out there. The next set of challenge types that I want to go over, I think, are going to be particularly relevant for this group. So there are also challenges for enforceable commitment, not part of an enforceable commitment, and planned service. So enforceable commitment, that is going to be the challenge type that I referenced, where if we maybe don't have the full data about where ARPA funds, for example, are continuing to be distributed at a local level, and there really is an enforceable commitment that has been awarded to a provider, this is the challenge type that you're going to undertake to say, hey, this location actually is part of an enforceable commitment. Similarly, there will be a not part of enforceable commitment challenge type where maybe we have said that that's listed as part of next level connections, but that's been misidentified. And then finally, not enforceable commitment, but there also is a planned service challenge type. And so this is going to be the challenge for providers who have plans to build broadband out before the end of June, but there is not an enforceable commitment. So the evidence that's going to be needed here are construction contracts, any kind of evidence of an ongoing deployment that's happening, the permits either being applied or obtained, something to say that there are plans for this location. It's not built out yet. It's not part of an enforceable commitment, but it will be done kind of in that end of June timeframe. So want you all to keep these in mind. We are going to walk through how to submit a planned service challenge kind of next in this webinar. We've been hearing feedback from other states that this is one of the most frequent challenge types that they are getting. So we wanted to make sure that you saw really what that process looks like in the portal. And then finally, the last couple types of challenge types are the location being a community anchor institution or location not being a community anchor institution. So in this case, this will have to do with any location that an individual or an organization believes has been misidentified, and then would of course have to provide some kind of evidence showing that that location either does or does not meet the criteria that the IBO put forth in its volume 1 for community anchor institutions. The other piece I want to bring up about challenges is that Indiana has opted into the area and multi-dwelling unit challenges in our volume 1 that was approved. So this is something to keep in mind, and that will largely be calculated in ready.net as challenges come in. So you will notice in the flow of challenges as we walk through the screenshots, the system will ask if you are specifically trying to complete a multi-dwelling unit challenge. Area challenges will be I believe, calculated at the end of the challenge phase based on how many, total challenges. But effectively, what these do are lower the burden of proof for these challenges, so that if a certain number of locations within a single challenge type and a single provider and technology type within an area are challenged, then all with that same technology provider type in that area would be challenged. So I have the two examples here around area and multi-dwelling unit challenges. So on the left-hand side, you can see that's at the census block group level. So that's 6 locations. That within that single census block group that are the same challenge type, and technology and provider, that's when that challenge would be triggered. And then the same thing for multi-dwelling unit. It's at least 3 units or 10% of the units in a single multi-dwelling unit. So this may not be something that we're running into as frequently, but want you to be aware of that as we start looking at the flow of how the challenge process works. All right, I'm going to pause one more time for questions about challenge types before I jump into actually what the portal looks like and how one would submit a challenge.
Okay, we have a couple.
Great.
Okay, regarding challenge type, the question is, if you're using speed test as a challenge, how do you know that the speed test is actually accurate? Meaning, if the connection is actively downloading or streaming, the challenge is largely invalid.
Okay, so I can also let others speak to this. So speed tests, we know that there are some issues with those. With the speed test guidance, NTIA, does encourage states to use speed tests, but using kind of a higher burden of proof. That's why you have to have 3 different speed tests on 3 different days, all within 60 days of the challenge actually being submitted. I will also say an approved version of the speed test, there are only certain speed tests that can actually be used that meet the minimum level of evidence for this type of challenge. We're encouraging all permissible challengers to use the actual Connecting Indiana speed test, as that is an approved source. And that is going to ask some survey questions throughout about, was that individual on a VPN? Were they on Wi-Fi or wired directly to the router? Questions like that give us a better sense of what that looks like for that individual speed test. So, we know that this can be a tough point, but we are trying to mitigate that with some of these standards for speed tests, and also know that all challenges will be reviewed when the evidence is submitted to ensure that the minimum level of evidence is met. So someone is going to have eyes on all of these challenges to ensure that they actually make sense, and that all of the documentation is accurate.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Moving on to the next one. Does fiber on a pole next to a road equal available service, or does it have to be active to a home on the road for the challenge purposes?
It would have to be to that home for it to be for the home to be considered served by that. It can't just be on the road. It would be fiber to the premises.
Okay, another one. Kevin says, for the current builds, did it say that the area must be built sometime in 2024? Depending on the project, it may be done in phases and take, say, 18 to 24 months to complete.
So I am going to guess that this is specifically around that planned service challenge type. So end of June is the cutoff for that. And that is not an Indiana decision. That is an NTIA model challenge process decision about how they approach. So if there is planned service, but it is outside of that time frame, that is not eligible for that planned service challenge to deduplicate it from the BEAD locations.
Okay. We are caught up on questions unless anyone else would like to put something in the chat at this time.
All right, then we will move right along into actually talking about what the portal looks like and going through 2 examples of challenge submission. So as I mentioned, I think planned service is a really great example for this group in particular. So that's the one that we're going to walk through first. So I'm going to try and hit some of the highlights of the Connecting Indiana portal. If there are any specific questions, I may pull on Dustin and Richmond, who are here with us today. But yes, so this, yeah, absolutely.
Before you move on, we had one more come in really quickly before we get too far into something else. The question is, what about 10-day service window, being able to serve a premise within 10 days, question mark.
So that would be under an availability challenge. So if, let's say an individual did submit an availability challenge and say that they are not connected, but the reality is that, fiber is on the pole and it could be deployed to their home within 10 days, you'd be able to submit rebuttal evidence to that effect.
Okay, I believe we are caught up now.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So all of these screenshots moving forward, a couple of caveats. I want to say that we are still loading the full data into the portal. So this is likely not exactly what the portal will look like, when you're accessing it as a permissible challenger. This is a staging environment, so there are likely to be changes made, but this is to give you a sense of what the requirements are and what it will look like when the time comes. It is likely not to be an exact. So starting off, when your organization has been approved for the portal and you log in, you will immediately come to a dashboard, a challenge dashboard. So the view on this is going to change a little bit depending on what phase of the process we are in. But if we are in the challenge submission phase, what a permissible challenger is going to see are some high-level counts about the number of challenges that they've submitted, the number that have been reviewed and need revision, and the number that they have withdrawn. You are also going to be able to see down here below the number where the initial review has been processed. So this is that review just to make sure that the minimum level of evidence kind of criteria has been met. So this is what the dashboard looks like. On the left-hand side, you will also be able to go look at the challenge map. This is a place where you can go and look at how different addresses are categorized for the challenge process and use that as a tool. So to start a challenge, you're going to click the Add Challenge button that is on this dashboard, and it's immediately going to put you into the flow. So you can see across the top here that we have circled, this is the general flow for any kind of challenge type that any permissible challenger will be submitting throughout the process. This is also going to be the flow whether you're submitting a single location for a certain type of challenge or, a bulk upload of, several locations for a challenge type. So the first thing that you're going to do is select that challenge category. It's broken out by obviously planned or existing service, the enforceable commitment, all of those provider service level type challenges. That's going to be the availability speed challenges, and then community anchor institution classification. In this case, you'd click on planned or existing service. Then you'd be prompted to choose which of those you are trying to challenge, in this case, planned service. When you move forward to the challenge details, this is the kind of information that you will be asked for planned service. You will have to confirm and attest that the service will be deployed before the end of June. You'll have to report what the technology type is, the advertised download and upload speeds, that the latency meets the minimum requirements, as well as whether this is residential, business, service, or both. Once that is all confirmed, that is when a permissible challenger will then be able to select the locations for their planned service challenge. So there are multiple ways that you can select locations within ready.net. So the first of those is that you can use that search bar on the map and search for individual addresses and click them and add them to your challenge. As you can guess, this is probably more useful for, one or two challenges. There's also kind of a click and drag feature. If there's, all of the locations in a certain area that you are challenging, that's an option. I will also say there is some more advanced technology within the portal for internet service providers. If ahead of time you want to upload some shape files about the zones that you serve, you can also then use some of those zones to be able to automatically select them for your challenges. Just depends on exactly how deeply you want to use this and how many locations that you are planning to challenge. If you have a CostQuest license, an option that you can do here is to upload a list of locations. And what that would be is uploading a CSV file of the location IDs of all of the locations that you plan to challenge in this particular challenge type. So those are your options. Click and select, click and drag, and then uploading more of that bulk upload number of location IDs. Again, that's only going to be possible for someone who has a CostQuest license. As you
This is
start
to address two things that have popped up actually.
Okay, great.
So one question is, if you challenge 6 or more locations in a census block group, must you prove all the locations in that group?
Of those 6, yes. In the entire census block group, no. So that would fall under one of those area challenges. And again, remember, that's only going to apply to the challenge type, provider, and technology type in that census block group. But if you challenged 6 in a census block group, keeping in mind those caveats, and all 6 of those challenges were accepted, automatically all of the locations in that census block group that fall under those same conditions would also be challenged. Great question.
Thank you. And then the next question, if we can't challenge based upon close proximity to fiber, example of 500 feet, would a challenge based on planned service also require that a drop be installed to the location? Most providers build to an area and install drops only for those requesting service.
So I think this is likely, again, only going to be a problem if you have not already submitted that location as being able to be served on the FCC map. But this sounds like more of a potentially a one-off conversation that maybe we can talk about a little bit more in depth later, if that sounds okay.
Thanks, Megan. And then just for the sake of full disclosure, there was a request for a demo of bulk submissions. And then another question just came in as well. There was a question that says, will there be an export function like address or FID address or whatever? I do have a CostQuest D license, but I'd be doing a lot of challenges if I took every location ID in our existing footprint. I assume some of those will be removed via DBC or BDC comparison, so would rather just deal with the fallout.
Okay, so I think let's continue on the demo, and I'll point out where there are some capabilities to download location IDs directly from ready.net. And then if you still have questions later, I think we can address it there. So a couple more things that I want to point out. We will make all of the CSV templates available online ahead of the challenge process actually opening. So it is difficult to just show a CSV here. If you were going to do that bulk upload of locations, it is a very basic CSV. It is quite literally just the location IDs, and that's it. And you would upload it here and they would appear. But again, we will make those templates available online for individuals to look at ahead of time. So when you are starting to select locations for planned service, I'm just going to show you some of the tools that are available. All of these that I'm going to show in this entire demo are purely example addresses. I quite literally just zoomed into what is there and chose them at random. So that is all that they are. They are not targeted in any way, just an example to show you what this looks like. So even as you are looking to select locations, as you click on them, you can click on any of the locations and see location details such as the address, the location ID identifiers, lat long, what the building type is, as well as all of the providers that have been identified as serving that location. So this is what it's going to start to look like as you add those locations. So if you're adding them manually, you'll probably have fewer locations here where the location ID is on top and then the address is on the bottom, but then you will see a similar list of location IDs as well when you upload that list of locations, if that's the route that you want to go. To the question about being able to download any kind of location IDs from ready.net, let's say that you come into the portal and you start searching for your let's say 10 addresses for this particular challenge. You can enter all of those into the search bar. And then when you are done, you will be able to download a spreadsheet of the location IDs for the locations that you've selected. So this is a great tool. Let's say you know that those are the locations that you want to challenge, but you don't have time to complete the entire submission process right now. You can download that CSV, and then when you would come back, all you would have to do is upload that CSV rather than type in all of your addresses again to get to this exact same place with the selected locations that you know you want to challenge. So after, no matter what method, whether that is the kind of bulk upload CSV or manually selecting individual locations, once you are complete, you'll hit the next button. And that's when you'll be prompted to provide evidence and documentation for your challenge type. So in this case, you're going to want internet service providers are going to want to organize these planned service challenges around the specific evidence that they have. So if you have one piece of evidence that is going to cover several locations, one singular kind of permit or building out plan, that's how you're going to want to group these for the challenge process. So again, as you can see, the evidence for planned service are those construction contracts, something showing that there's ongoing deployment that's going to be completed by that end of June date. You would upload all of that information here, no matter how many addresses or locations it is. And that is really what is going to substantiate your challenge. After you have uploaded that evidence, you will be shown an attestation to verify the validity of your challenge submission data. You'll have to confirm, and then you will press submit, and then that challenge will officially go into review. So at that point, it would show as kind of pending on your dashboard, and that would be when the Indiana Broadband Office would review all of the challenges submitted for meeting that minimum level of evidence necessary to substantiate that challenge. All right, I'm going to pause there for any more questions. I know this is not like an absolutely complete demo. We're going to have some, more opportunities for office hours and individual engagement with internet service providers. But with the time we have today, certainly want to give you a look at what, that flow looks like and what the portal looks like. So Madison, what questions do we have?
No new questions, but can we check on the waiting room?
Absolutely. There's one in the waiting room. Okay, great. If there are no questions, I'm going to run through the flow that is a little bit different for one more challenge type. I think it is the most complex of the challenge types, and that's the speed challenge, just because of the level of evidence for 3 different speed tests on 3 different days. That's a lot of evidence to collect. And so even though this may not be a very common one necessarily for internet service providers, I think it's helpful to see kind of both sides of how this portal functions and how one might submit a challenge. So again, you're going to start from a really similar place. Add that challenge from your main dashboard. Again, this is going to look like a really similar flow for all of these. You're going to go by challenge category. So think about this as you're organizing your evidence. This is a way that you can start to break it down and prepare before March 4th. So we're going to go for a speed. We're going to go to that provider service level challenge. Then within that, you'll see all of those individual challenge types: availability, speed, latency, data cap, technology, and business service only. And here's where you would select speed. Again, this flow is going to be really similar across all of these challenge types, but just to give you an idea. So as I mentioned, when we were talking about area and multi-dwelling unit challenges, area is going to be calculated at the end of the challenge phase once we have all of those challenges. Multi-dwelling unit, if you are specifically trying to complete a multi-dwelling unit challenge, you will select yes here. If not, this is a question that you'll say no, and you will pass by that. We're not going to get too deeply into the multi-dwelling unit today, but just so you know, that is in the flow, so don't be alarmed when you see that. So for the speed challenges specifically, when you get into challenge details, these challenges will be organized by provider, the technology type, and then the level being challenged. So this is the first question that you will come across. You will have to select which provider is being challenged, their technology that is being challenged at that location, and whether that location is classified as served, but should actually be unserved or underserved, or if that location is underserved, but should actually be unserved. So as you're thinking about preparing some of those lists of location IDs or addresses and how to, start preparing your evidence, think of organizing it in this way by the provider, by the technology type, and the level being challenged. This is also a place where even when you're looking at this, you can always go into the map. You can do some filtering to be able to see unserved and underserved locations or specific building types, community anchor institutions. It's hard to do with screenshots. But there is a lot of functionality throughout this entire challenge submission process that you can lean on the map that's there for. You can also always search for those individual addresses as well to get the information to this question. Let's say you were just submitting a single location, but maybe you're not sure exactly what that looks like. You can find all of that location information. Again, when you choose a specific location, you can start to see the individual providers and at what level they are providing service there. So in this instance, we're going to fill in all of that location, make some selections, and that is how we would fill out our challenge details with the provider and the technology type. The next step for a speed challenge is going to be selecting those locations. Again, this is going to be a very similar process to that planned service. You can do the search here in the corner to look up those individual addresses. If you are doing kind of a lower number of challenges, you could also upload that list of location IDs if you have a CostQuest license and have the capability to do that. This is the same place where those locations are going to start populating as soon as you make those selections. Again, these are just example locations, nothing particularly significant, just a random sample from the state. Again, this is another place where you have that functionality to go ahead and download those location IDs if this is a place where you need to pause and circle back to. When you go to next, in terms of evidence and documentation, it is a little bit more complicated for a speed challenge. It is really the most complicated of all of the challenge types, just based on all of the pieces of evidence. So what you are going to do, this is what's going to show up on that right-hand side of the screen when you submit a speed challenge. It's going to give you information about all of the evidence mapping and metadata that a permissible challenger will need to fill out to substantiate this challenge. So as you can see, that's going to be the speed test file names, the customer name and address, the speed tier file that they're paying for, the test method, date, time, IP address, all information that will be available in that kind of speed test PDF, for example, if you're using the Connecting Indiana portal. And so what a permissible challenger would do for a speed challenge is they would click this download speed test evidence button. And what that's going to do is download a pre-populated CSV file that has those location IDs. Sorry about that. As well as all of the fields that need to be filled out specifically for this challenge type. So to walk you through it here, the left-hand side are all of those instructions for filling out the CSV. That button is going to allow you to download that CSV file with the pre-filled location IDs. You will fill out the metadata for each of the locations that are being challenged and then re-upload it along with all of the evidence files. So all of the speed test PDFs, screenshots of tiers of service that the consumer is paying for, etc., to complete that submission. I am going to show you what the CSV looks like for the speed test. And then again, I'll reiterate that this is going to be made available on the IBO website as well. So these are the types of files that you can start looking at and start thinking about ways to prepare even before the challenge process starts. So when you download that speed test evidence CSV, this is what it's going to look like. So you will notice those location IDs on the left, and then you will have one line for each of those speed test numbers, since 3 are required to substantiate each of those challenges. So what will be filled in then for each test? These are kind of the metadata points that will need to be filled into the CSV for every location and every speed test for that location that is being challenged. We certainly know that this is a lift to be able to fill out this CSV and really organize all of the evidence and data specifically around speed tests, which is why we wanted to give you a look at this now so that we can start, doing some training, answering any questions as time goes on, and that organizations can start to prepare this data ahead of time. After this CSV has been successfully completed, again, you'll come back to this page and re-upload that CSV as well as all of the evidence files for all of the locations that are being challenged by this challenge type. They will all be uploaded here. And then again, you will see when you click next, a similar attestation verifying the validity of the challenge and submitting that data. All right, I'm going to pause again for questions.
We have a few.
Great.
The first is Starlink and cellular included in the map?
I believe they are on the map, but it is all shown as unserved, as it is not eligible for being served under this program.
Okay. The next question is, will you be providing a CSV file of unserved and underserved locations for ISPs to download and verify against their mapping data?
We should be able to provide that ahead of the challenge process. That is the intent, to be able to provide that, yes.
Great. Another, some MDUs have locked in contracts or agreements, meaning they don't allow any other providers to come in and serve. How are you handling that?
Yep. So I think that is a place specifically that would that provider may need to submit that during the rebuttal evidence to show that those agreements exist. One of the things with this is we're giving example evidence, but that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be specific scenarios where other evidence makes sense to help tell the story. So certainly if there's other evidence, know that someone's eyes are going to be on all of these challenges. So if there are some unique situations like that, we can certainly work through them with whatever evidence is needed.
Great bridge for the next one, which is, are there evidence requirements outside of the portal so we can look at them beforehand?
Yes, absolutely. So those evidence requirements are available in our initial proposal, volume 1. We'll make sure that we send that out kind of in the next email blast as a reminder that there's a full table in volume 1 of every single challenge type, the evidence that's needed, as well as the rebuttal evidence that would be eligible to rebut any challenges that are submitted by that type. So we'll make sure that that's a resource that's at the top of your inbox.
Thanks so much, Megan. I think we're all caught up, but if anybody has anything else, be sure to get your questions in. And just as a time marker, we're looking at about 7 minutes left.
Absolutely. So I'm going to use the last 7. Oh, one more question.
One more question. What cost quest license does the state have?
That is a really great question. I do not remember what tier states have.
I believe
It is, yeah, it's separate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So moving into just closing us.
Dustin let us know it's tier C. Thanks, Dustin.
Okay. Thanks, Dustin. I appreciate it. All right, so moving in to wrap up, I know that we largely have internet service providers on this call, so want to go ahead and look ahead to the rebuttal phase. We will have more resources coming out around the rebuttal phase as we get closer, but that is going to, again, be immediately following the challenge phase. That's when the challenge internet service provider can respond to any challenge that has been submitted. Again, the internet service provider will be notified as soon as that challenge comes in, but then they will actually submit the rebuttal evidence during that 30-day period. If a provider does a rebuttal to a challenged location with acceptable evidence, that location will then enter a disputed state, and that means it will go through the final determination process. So just be thinking that after the challenge phase, particularly for internet service providers, there is that rebuttal phase where you may also be gathering additional evidence and rebutting those challenges. Just to remind you of those dates again, that's going to be April 4th through May 3rd. Like I said, going to be notified of those verified challenges as soon as we can confirm that they meet that minimum level of evidence. And this is great. I think I just said this in response to a question. We will continue pushing out resources for the rebuttal phase as we get closer as well. But if you have questions for now, certainly refer to volume 1 that is out there. It does have that information about rebuttal evidence as well if you have questions about it. But in general, that rebuttal submission process is going to be very, very similar to that challenge submission process that we just walked through. And again, just to really remind you of those dates. Again, this is the full flow of the challenge process. Rebuttal phase is going to be that April 4th to May 3rd, and then that final determination phase will follow immediately afterwards. So to wrap us up, I'm going to leave you with some action items for internet service providers. First and foremost, if you have not already done so and expect that it will benefit you, secure a CostQuest license. We're trying to be really proactive about this because we have no idea really how long it's going to take to get just the sheer volume of permissible challengers that are requesting licenses approved, and we want to make sure that everyone has the tools that they need. So look at that CostQuest license. You can also start beginning to think about the types of challenges and the evidence that you have to submit. Again, we will let individuals know when we start to have those CSVs available online, so that you can start to prepare. Look out for an email in the next couple of weeks about pre-registration beginning and get your organization registered on the ready.net portal, and really be prepared to submit your challenges and evidence starting on March 4th. And then the last thing that I want to hit on, the Broadband Office is going to be offering several office hours opportunities for anyone who wants to hop on and ask questions about the challenge process. Those are going to be much less formal. That's going to be, we'll be there if you have questions about getting registered or starting to gather evidence, or how it will look to submit a certain type of challenge. We will send out all of the links for you to be able to hop on these. That isn't you don't have to come and stay from 2 to 3, hop on at any time. It just means that there will be resources there and available for you to ask any questions that may arise. And then of course, if you can't come to any of those office hours, or if you think of something tomorrow that you'd like answered, you can always reach the Broadband Office at ibochallenge@iot.ion.gov. We're constantly monitoring that email address and are there to answer your questions. All right, that is the last slide that I have. Madison, any last questions to wrap us up?
Yes, we had just a couple come in. Who and how will
Great.
providers be made aware of challenges?
So that will be internet service providers will be made aware of challenges on portal. So on that dashboard, when challenges start to be received for that internet service provider, that will show up on the dashboard. And I believe there's also an email alert that goes as well automatically when a challenge comes.
And what are the expected award dates?
So after the challenge process is completed, we do not have our volume 2 approved yet, and subgrantee selection will not start until our volume 2 is approved. We can't choose a date until that happens, but we will expect that very quickly after we finish our challenge process. We will then move into the publishing the addresses and entering the time frame where internet service providers will prepare their first round of submissions. So no hard date. I would expect that to be early to mid-June.
Okay, I think those are all the questions, and we are at 3:50.